Duralde. Alonso is on location. So good to see you because today is a huge day and you are all here for it. It is the beginning. It is the launch of Hollywood Pride. You are all here for a momentous day.
It is
all right.
Pub Day. A term that I learned. Publication Day. It's Pub Day.
Pub Day is more than just getting drunk at noon.
Yes.
Pub Day is a day about books. Hi, Jesse. Good to see you. He says, congratulations, Alonso.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for being here.
So Alonso's new book, Hollywood Pride, is here for your enjoyment. If you can pre-order it through the link in our description there down below.
Now there's no pre anymore. Now you can order it.
You can just order it. You can go to your favorite local bookstore. If it's not already at your favorite local bookstore, you can ask them to order it for you. And what were we telling folks about urging their libraries to get it?
Yeah, if your library doesn't have a physical copy, request it. And also if your library uses the Libby app, which carries ebooks and audiobooks, both of those editions are available as well. And so there's a way if you can't check it out or put yourself on a hold list to check it out, if they aren't offering it, where you can sort of ping it and request that they get it. So yeah, if I get it's, look, this thing's not cheap. It's a very nice coffee table book.
It is.
So I urge people for whom it is not in their budget, which I totally get it from your library. And if your library doesn't have it, get them to get it.
Yes, indeed. We need to spread the word. So we get lots of congratulations from all of our folks, from Teddy and Jesse and All in the Game and Christine, and Matt says, congrats, Alonso. So excited for my copy to come. I'm also hounding my library for an audiobook version. And when you get the audiobook, you get to enjoy the dulcet tones of Alonso himself.
Endure is the word.
Enjoy. I said enjoy.
Oh, I thought you said endure, but I'll take either.
Enjoy. No, your lovely voice. Great. So I've got so many questions for you, Alonso. I know you guys out there probably have questions too, so we'll get to all of those. But first of all, it's encyclopedic. It is getting its arms around so much, and yet it's a really breezy read. And you touch on a lot of important people, and I think a lot of folks will be, very enlightened to learn about the history of a lot of folks in front of and behind the camera that maybe they did not know were queer. Like I didn't know F.W. Murnau was gay.
Yep, he was indeed. And actually, there becomes that angle of like, well, where do we see it in the work? And I think the one where that appears the most for him is his version of Faust, which, the traditional story is always, the man who is tempted and the devil and the good woman who might save him. But this one in particular, there's a seductive quality to the devil where it's like, ditch her, stay with me, that I think kind of permeates the whole thing. But, there are themes and elements that run throughout his work, both in the horror that he's well known for, like Nosferatu, and he also did an unauthorized Jekyll and Hyde movie called Der Jahreskopf. I'm a huge fan of Sunrise, which is a very heterosexual romance, but I think made with a real, he had such a great sense of visual style in silent cinema. That Sunrise, actually the first year at the Oscars, they had 2 awards. One was Best Picture and one was like artistic production or something. And Sunrise won that one. And then later they kind of merged the two. But, I just think he had such a precise eye for stuff. He was amazing.
An interesting through line of people who were involved with horror who also were queer. If you look at James Whale, I didn't realize Vincent Price was bisexual.
Yep.
So what is that? What is that about, do you think? Like exploring stories of people who are other or potentially scary? Is that something to do with it, you think?
I mean, certainly I think among fans, and if you watch the doc on Shudder that I got to be a part of, Queer for Fear, we talk about this a lot, this notion of like the outsider, and identifying with the monster, because the Frankenstein monster, is he a bad guy that everybody's chasing with torches, or do they just not understand him? Is he just different and represent something that they're not ready to grasp, And definitely I think Whale brings a lot of, like Ernest Thesiger in all those movies is camping it up madly, whether it's, Bride of Frankenstein or The Old Dark House or whatever. But yeah, there's absolutely a queer line of through line of queer horror all the way through cinema. And there are a lot of books specifically about that subject. Actually, my friend Sean Abley has like an encyclopedia of queer horror coming out in July. So people who are interested in that Venn diagram, there's a lot to dig into.
Yes, for sure. Wendy Como says, live, I never make it to these things. Yay. Well,
Yay.
we were happy to have you. And Nicole says, I started the audiobook this morning and I love it already.
Oh, thank you. I listened to like the sample and I was like, I can't listen. I can listen to me on a podcast having a conversation, but to listen to me reading my own text is like, no, I can't do it. At some point I will sit down and listen to it, but at the moment I'm just too like self-conscious about it all.
No. I get that as somebody who talks a lot for a living. It's like, okay, I'm so sick of the sound of my own voice. So I very much get that. Yes. So Angel says, I knew Murnau was gay when I saw Shadow of the Vampire, which is a movie that I loved and just forgot that he's gay in that. We have lots of congrats for you from Ed Looney and from John Gargo.
Thanks.
John says one of my favorite queer coded films is Hitchcock's Rope, and you have a whole Hitchcock section in your book rather.
Yeah, I the book is chronological, and in going through the decades, I found that like every decade there were a good 3 or 4 Hitchcock movies. You'd be like, let's talk about these real quick. So it's like a little sidebar that recurs throughout. And yeah, Rope is probably his most overtly queer film, even if Arthur Lawrence, who was the screenwriter, said that at the time Hitch denied thinking of it that way, but he's like, he knew it was there, it was obvious. And like, it was so queer that Cary Grant and Montgomery Clift turned down the roles of the professor and one of the young killers because they were like, yeah, no, I'm not wading into that one. But two gay actors do play the killers in that movie, which is interesting. And there's a recurring thing with Hitchcock where he'll cast queer actors in these roles where they're supposed to be sort of suspicious,
So you were already so knowledgeable about this topic, but in digging in deeper and researching the book, what surprised you that you learned along the way?
Oh, a bunch of stuff. Definitely people that I wasn't aware of, like, Angela Morley, the first out trans person to be nominated for an Oscar. She got 2 nominations in the 70s in the song score category. And she was this very prolific composer and conductor. She arranged like pretty much every John Williams score you love, but also like composed music for Wonder Woman and Dynasty and like just a whole panoply of stuff. And worked on the like arrangements and conducting for things like Jesus Christ Superstar and The Slipper and the Rose. So had a really extraordinary career, both pre and post transitioning. This guy James Crabe, who was a cinematographer on movies like Rocky and The Karate Kid, and he'd actually kind of come up through this group in the 60s rather, called the Gay Girls Writing Club. And it was this loose affiliation of people in LA. It was like gay men in the film industry and drag queens and other folks. And they would make these silly, campy short films that were sort of parodies of mainstream movies, like, What Really Happened to Baby Jane. And they would just screen them at like bars and parties and stuff. And out of that emerges this guy who then becomes like a major cinematographer of the 70s and then tragically dies in his 50s from AIDS-related complications.
Oh.
But the Gay Girls Writing Club shorts were restored a few years back by AGFA, by American Genre Film Archive, and you can watch them on Canopy and on Tubi if you want to check them out.
Was it easier at all over the course of cinema to be gay or to be like, known as gay behind the scenes versus in front of the camera?
For sure. If those are the comparisons, definitely. I think the era has a lot to do with it in terms of the sort of, it wasn't until like after Stonewall that anybody was remotely sort of like big and in your face and loud about it. But there were sort of degrees of, I talk about in the early 30s, there was this phenomenon in Hollywood known as the pansy craze, where there would be these gay clubs and like drag performers and, doing like, the floor show. And they were among the last clubs where you could still get alcohol during Prohibition. So they became real popular among like studio heads and stars and would show up and watch the drag acts. And then eventually the police started raiding them. And that sort of was part of an ongoing campaign of the police against gay bars for much of the 20th century. But yeah, I think the marquee names always had a lot more attention on them and were sort of forced to be a lot more dialed back with that kind of stuff. Particularly, another thing I learned for your previous question, when the production code comes in the 30s, like we all know that it very much sort of, sterilizes movies in a lot of way and makes all these things you can't talk about or show or discuss or whatever. But it also kind of bled into the off-screen lives of the stars, especially, where the studios were like, all right, you two can't just live together. You got to get married, or you got to marry a woman or a man, as the case may be. And, you know, women, you got to stop wearing pants. We're all going to create this, you know, this aura of cozy domesticity as how, you know, how Hollywood works. And so the code was affecting off-screen behavior as well as on.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought up pants. I was going to mention pants as like pants are code, right? Like, oh my God, Katharine Hepburn wears pants. I love the exchange, the snippet of the exchange that you have between Katharine Hepburn and Barbara Walters. And Barbara Walters asking her about wearing pants and, do you have a skirt? And Hepburn goes, I have one. I'll wear it to your funeral. I love that. So quick.
Shade.
She wore pants. A couple questions I want to make sure I get to here before they slip too high in the chat. Landon asks, congrats, Alonso. Any plans to do a book tour potentially in the Midwest?
Well, I'll tell you, book tours as such, I mean, maybe they still happen if you're like Stephen King or something, but the rest of us are all kind of like cobbling stuff together. So at the moment, I've been in the process of like trying to make things happen in different cities that are sort of tied to something else. So I know that Chicago has a queer film festival coming up in the fall, and I have been talking to folks there about, hey, bring me in, I'll host a screening, we'll do a book signing, you know. So hopefully that happens. I would love for that to happen. But, you know, watch this space. I'll be posting about it on social. At the moment, I've got a few things happening in Southern California in June. In July, I'm going to be at Bramblefest, which is the thing that the Deck the Hallmark guys put on every summer. And then on the way back from that, probably doing a one-night thing at the Belcourt in Nashville, which I'm psyched about. And then after that, not really sure. So if all else fails, if you really want a signed copy of the book, you can get them from booksoup.com, which is an LA indie-owned bookstore. But I am trying to get to other places. I would love to go to Chicago. I'd love to go to New York and San Francisco and Seattle and, you know, Atlanta, wherever will have me. So you'll be hearing about it, I promise.
Yeah. Does it help if our folks contact their local bookstore and say, hey, Alonso Duralde is great and his book is great. Can we arrange something? Is that, if it's like a grassroots kind of thing, is that helpful?
You know what? Bookstores are really having a hard time of it right now. I don't think any of them are going to be like, here's your airline ticket, you know, which is sort of what it kind of comes down to. So, but, you know, I think getting the book from your local indie is a great thing. People have asked me, oh, where should I get your book? And I'm like, wherever you normally go. And I know there are people who really set a lot of store by like, oh, your Amazon ranking and yada, yada. But I would just as soon, if you have a local like indie bookstore that you love, a local queer indie bookstore that you love, like give them the business.
Yes, I agree. Heather asks, is there a distinction between openly gay or only rumored?
Well, yeah. I mean, some people, you know, either talked about it or, you know, gave interviews later or wrote memoirs or, you know, left behind letters or diaries or something. But, you know, sorry, hang on. I'm in the desert. It's so dry.
Yes, you are. Speaking of being on location, Alonso is in Palm Springs right now for an event tonight with David Anson.
Yes, at 5:30 at the Best Bookstore in Palm Springs. That is the name of the store. So if you're in town, please come by. Yeah, and I discussed this in the foreword of the book. Doing any kind of queer history, whether it's about, you know, the entertainment industry or, you know, military history, any history that involves LGBTQ plus people, does at some point involve trafficking and gossip, because this is not the kind of thing where like, oh, you find the birth certificate or you find the land record or whatever. You know, this is a thing that people kept hidden for much of their lives by necessity, because of, you know, legal pushback, because of, you know, career things, whatever. So, you know, it became a question of like, what sources do I trust for gossip? You know, William J. Mann wrote a really great book called Behind the Screen that's very thoroughly researched and featured a lot of interviews with people who were around in that era and working in that era. So that I thought was a reliable thing to turn to. You know, Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon, a fun read, but I wouldn't trust any of it. It's, you know, over time, it has not really held up as a as a piece of scholarship. It's more a gossip fantasia. So yeah, there are rumors involved in this, and there are some times where I'm like, well, ultimately we're just not going to know. You know, the people are gone. Everybody who would know is gone, and you know, we have to sort of glean from certain sources or whatever. But you know, sometimes it is just kind of like a bit of a guess.
Yeah, William Mann also wrote a Katharine Hepburn biography, which I have, which I am currently using to prop up my light. The tripod's on the Katharine Hepburn book. Like, it's just the right height to go above the top of my laptop. So the reason you can see me is because of William J. Mann.
There you go. And he also wrote Wisecracker, which is a really great book about William Haynes, who was an early movie star who left the industry and became a very successful interior decorator. And he and his partner, Jimmy Shields, were like pretty much the only same-sex couple who were absolutely openly accepted in Hollywood society, like on all levels.
Interesting. Okay, Christine Dugas. I gotta say hello to Christine, our good friend. Thank you for your kind contribution. We always appreciate seeing you. She asks, did the increasingly regressive political climate LGBTQ plus in the US affect you or even inspire you to push back while writing?
Oh, it crossed my mind more than once. You know, definitely this is the atmosphere in which the book was written and is now coming out. Absolutely was a thing going on. And I think it also kind of calls to mind how history repeats, you know, because you look back at the Weimar era of Germany, and there was there's a lot of progressive thought about sexuality. It was sort of the first time that people were studying sexuality in a scientific way, like before Kinsey, before Freud even. And then you had the Nazis sweep in and just destroy the entire Magnus Hirschfeld, you know, library and all of his research, all the work that he had done. And part of how they came to power was by sort of othering people as being, oh, these corrupting influences, whether it was Jewish people or queer people or trans people. You know, the fascist playbook is to sort of find them, demonize them, you know, build your support around people who hate them and want to eliminate them. And we're seeing that again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, your book is very up to the minute as far as a lot of the things that it includes. So, like you were like writing right until the last day of 2023, it seems.
Pretty much, yeah. Squeezing in whatever I could.
Few things we got to mention here. Binyam White says, "Congratulations, Alonso. Hope to see you promoting your book on TV." Matt says, I ordered mine from Book Soup. It felt nice to cancel my Amazon order. LOL. Wendy Como says, Minneapolis. I have a couch, but our bookstore has no budget. I offer a complete set of Leonard and Larry.
Oh, nice.
Yes. And John Kaufman says, what do you believe about Cary Grant and Randolph Scott?
That's, you know, that one comes up a lot. I think it's safe to say that Cary Grant was bisexual. You know, you have on the one hand the sort of like, you know, the fervent, you know, belief that he and Randolph Scott were longtime lovers. They shared a house together, and that's a possibility. You also have like Diane Cannon, you know, who was like, no, absolutely, he was, you know, he was as straight as an arrow. And even like Jennifer Grant, his one child who he had with Diane Cannon, his final wife, has gone from being very adamant about her father's heterosexuality to basically kind of saying, well, if he was bisexual, I hope he was happy. So I think she's even acknowledging a little bit of a gray area there. You know, and you have the diary of the autobiography of costume designer Ori Kelly, who was always out in his career and talked about having an affair with young Archie Leach when they were both living in New York and hadn't moved to Hollywood yet. So I think there's some paper trail there. But ultimately, you know, who knows?
Heather wants to know, was there same-sex casting couch type exploitation too?
Yes, there was. A guy named Henry Wilson was the agent to Rock Hudson and Tab Hunter and a lot of other sort of, you know, mid-50s beefcake post-World War II kind of stars. And he was a lech and a self-loathing gay man. So yeah, he checks all the boxes. So yeah, I think absolutely he, you know, I don't know about with all of his clients, you know, certainly like I'm sure Rock and Tab were such big deals that maybe he didn't want to, you know, kill those golden geese. But I'm sure with a lot of the other ones who weren't going anywhere and he wasn't worried about losing, I don't doubt there were shenanigans.
Bob asks, do you plan on coming up to Frameline since there will be no Outfest?
I would have loved to, and had reached out, but it doesn't look like they were able to make that happen. But I'm hoping to find some other reason to get to San Francisco.
Yeah. Ed asks, there's obviously a lot of tragedy and sadness in queer history. Is your book going to, for lack of a better term, depress me? Was it hard to find the right tonal balance? I mean, I'll speak for having just looked at it. There's a lot of joy and celebration of the pantheon of queer expression in film. Like there's Steven Stucker gets a whole section. So
thank you. Yeah, I don't think it's a bummer. I mean, the people lived in a period where it was difficult to be out or impossible to be out. But, everybody who's in this book, made an impact on the cinema in one way or another, whether they were an actor or a director or, I've got hairdressers and costume designers and cinematographers and, all kinds of folks in there. I think if nothing else, that it's an example. It's a hopeful thing of like, even with all of these things in society set against them and the law and other, the church, whoever it was that was trying to make life shitty for queer people, these people found a place where they could, express their art and do stuff that we still love and still talk about.
John and Andrea both congratulate you on your new book.
Thanks.
John says, just ordered it. Can't wait to read. And then a different John Stone asks, hey gang, who would you say is the most compelling gay character you have seen in a movie? Could be a main character or supporting role. That's tough.
Wow. God,
want to think about it and come back to that one?
I wouldn't know where to begin.
We can come back to that one.
Sure.
Hello, Matt Jazz fan. Thank you very, very much for your kind contribution. Matt says, Alonso, congrats. Just wondering, is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge included in the book? Has to be one of my favorite horrors with queer subtext.
It is. I didn't have the later I get in the book, the more I had to really kind of cram things in, because obviously there's more queer movies in the 80s than there were in the 40s, so it might be a somewhat passing reference, but it's absolutely in there, as is Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, which if you've ever seen that one, another fascinating queer horror artifact of the early 80s.
I know at the very beginning, at the outset of your book, you say, if I didn't go in depth on a movie or a filmmaker or a character that you love, like I did my best to get things in. And at the end of each section, you've got like lists of other notable names and maybe a line or two. How did you decide who to go big on and who to just mention? Like Ryan Murphy is in your also rans. That's how deep your exploration is here. How did you pick who to put where?
Well, I mean, Ryan Murphy, most of his stuff has been for TV. So it kind of, sort of able to, it was tricky because it wasn't like, obviously I'm not saying, oh, this person is less interesting or less important. I had to sort of kind of highlight things in a different way. It's a TCM book, so I couldn't skimp on, like pre-1960. I think a lot of the readership of the people who watch that network want to know about like classic Hollywood and stuff. And, I would have to say that, admittedly, in the latter part of the book, I give preference to women and people of color and trans filmmakers, because there aren't any up to a certain point in terms of, after like the early silent films, like women got pushed out of the director jobs for men, and kind of did, you could edit maybe, so unless you were Dorothy Arzner, there really weren't a lot of women directors. So once we started getting to Donna Deitch and the New Queer Cinema and, Cheryl Dunier and people like that, it's like, well, I'm going to give them a moment here. So yeah, it was a tough balance, and I will be haunted forever by some things that I wasn't able to go deeper into, but I covered 130 years in 95,000 words.
Oh, and it zips by. It's such a quick read. It could have been like didactic and encyclopedic, but it's a really enjoyable read for sure. Yeah, Teddy, a couple of different times in the chat was asking, how does the partnership with TCM work? Will there be a potential documentary to go along with this?
Well, TCM has basically their publishing arm is working with Running Press, which is part of Hachette. And they just put out Dave Karger's 50 Oscar Nights book, which is really terrific, and I recommend. Kristen Lopez's But Have You Read the Book, where she takes 52 classic films and sort of compares them to the literary source material that they come from. And so TCM basically kind of brands the books and promotes the book. So, you'll be seeing me in little bumper ads between movies. You'll see the book. And Dave Karger and I are going to do a couple of nights of queer films in June. We're doing like a total of 4 intros, but there's going to be a bunch of other LGBTQ plus films showing after like our segments. So yeah, they'll be involved in that. And I would love for somebody to turn this book into a documentary. I'm following on the heels of 2 other books that TCM and Running Press did, Donald Bogle's Hollywood Black, and then Luis Reyes's Viva Hollywood. And Hollywood Black is going to be a doc series that Forrest Whitaker and Justin Simeon are executive producing. And in fact, I think it's going to premiere at Tribeca. So I keep telling Justin, me next, do me next.
Thank you so much, Cassie, for your 10th Super Plus chat extravaganza. Very, very kind of you. We appreciate your generosity. Skate Alex asks, wait, I just zoomed past it. What do you think of the Elsa is a lesbian or bi from Frozen speculation? You include her in the book, actually.
I did, yeah. And that was actually a longer piece that I wound up having to cut for space, unfortunately. But yeah, there's an Elsa is a lesbian, Elsa is bi, Elsa is ace reading of the Frozen films that is really interesting. And again, I think so much of it comes down to, once a work of art reaches the audience then makes of it what they will and sees what they see in it, whether or not the original intent of the creator was there. I asked a bunch of bisexuals on social media, hey, what's a bisexual cult film that isn't specifically bi, but that you're all into? And the overwhelming answer I got was 1999's The Mummy.
That's so interesting. I saw that. I'm like, wait, where, how, why?
It was news to me too. But yeah, apparently for a lot of bisexual millennials saw, Rachel Weisz and
Brendan Fraser.
Thank you. And we're like, yes, all of this, please.
Interesting. That is surprising to me. Bob says the book, The Man Who Invented Rock Hudson, The Pretty Boys and Dirty Deals of Henry Wilson was very interesting.
Yes.
And Jim Parsons played him in Hollywood, in the Ryan Murphy Hollywood.
I don't know if the real Wilson ever did the Dance of the Seven Veils, but maybe.
Yes. Leo, thanks you for your work and congratulates you. Thank you again, Christine. Again, thank you so much. And she asks, can we all eventually get to the Jonathan Bailey point recastability for an out gay character? Seen him in 3 things. He's one gay character, one straight, and one bi. I feel like Matt Bomer, his co-star in Fellow Travelers, also has that capability, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he played straight on Suits, right? Wasn't that was his big breakout?
And he's straight in the Magic Mike movies, right?
Yes, yeah, he totally is. I mean, I always point to Neil Patrick Harris on How I Met Your Mother, who's not just straight, but like a kind of cheesy womanizer. It's acting. I think that queer people, who are performers are capable of doing lots of different things. And, I get the question sometimes about like, how do you feel about straight people playing gay roles? And I'd be like, well, it wouldn't bother me so much if gay actors played more straight roles, but if all you're going to cast gay actors in is gay roles, then reserve those gay roles for them so they can work. Did I freeze?
Naiad and then a straight character in Night Country.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure. She can do it all.
Right. I mean, she's Jodie Foster and she gets a whole big section in your book. Andres says, greetings, Alonso and Christy. Love you guys. Thank you very, very much. We appreciate that. Raised on Popcorn with Grant says, hey, Alonso, I got your audiobook. So excited to listen.
Thank you.
Yes, Christine and Ed, everyone's very excited about The Mummy. Yes, that it was an awakening and they're all very hot. Chick Modest says, White Collar is the Matt Bomer show.
Right. Sorry, not Suits. Yes.
Not Suits. John McCormick, thank you so much. You're very, very kind. Says, I miss Matt and Ben, but love seeing you both continuing on. You both make my day. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We're glad that you have found us and stuck with us. Heather points out Jonathan Groff in Mindhunters and his grad student romance plotline. I don't know what that is.
Mindhunters was that David Fincher show on Netflix about the first profiler, which I did not see. Excuse me.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, no, I think there are a lot of examples of out actors. I mean, Coleman Domingo in Zola.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So who was your favorite person to write about in the book?
I mean, Tallulah Bankhead is just a font of bon mot and kind of just racy attitudes, and didn't have the most distinguished film career, but I think as a presence and as a personality, she's a fascinating figure. And I love the people who just had 0 Fs.
Yeah.
I loved how there's a character actress named Patsy Kelly. Who did early comedy shorts for there's a Max Sennett, I think. And then, she's one of the coven in Rosemary's Baby, and she was in the 70s Freaky Friday and, the North Avenue Regulars. You've seen her and stuff. She's just big, crusty, funny character actress lady. And, she never made any qualms about, I'm living with this actress, or, just didn't play the game in that way. And later in life gave an interview to Bose Hadley where she was like, I'm a big dyke, so what? Who cares? So I love that kind of moxie. I like to think that I could have had a similar sense of self in a period where you were really constantly being told not to.
Along those lines, you devote some time in a couple of different chapters to people like Steven Stucker or Paul Lind, who were the flamboyant, funny characters who aren't specifically gay in these roles, but watching it, you just know, the funny wisecracking next door neighbor or whatever it is.
Exactly. And Steven Stucker, a thing I learned about him was that after he contracted HIV, became very public about it in a period where people did not talk about that, and people were deathly afraid that if the truth about their health got out, that they wouldn't get work because everybody think, oh no, you're contagious, or you're unhealthy, blah blah blah. And he was very vocal. He went on Phil Donahue. He did a lot of education and sort of using his relative degree of fame to be like, hey, I'm a person that this has happened to, and I'm not what you think. It's not what you think it is. And then when he passed, apparently Variety did not mention what he died of, and the Daily News was like, yes, he was a very vocal HIV educator, and yet Variety left out his cause of death in their obituary. So it goes to show you how much the industry was grappling with the idea of oh, this terrible thing, and do we even talk about it, and what a taboo it was to be outspoken about it.
I wonder too if part of that is the tabloids or the trades, rather, their role in the machinery, right?
Oh,
perpetuating
for sure.
The dream factory. They're so crucial to that in terms of how things get placed and the ads people run.
And I'm sure that they had probably papered that over for other people with the consent of that person's, next of kin or the person themselves. But so they weren't used to being vocal about it. This was such a new thing to them that they did business as usual,
Bob asks, does Josh O'Connor get any mention for God's Own Country? That year's Frameline, he was also in another gay short. Of course, there's his Challengers character.
I do have God's Own Country in there. Challengers obviously was after my deadline, but I do include God's Own Country and the director, Josh Lee, something.
No,
I'm forgetting.
I'm going to look it up while you're talking.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyway, but yes, definitely included on the more contemporary films. And I should know the director's name because I've actually interviewed him for another podcast that I'm hoping is going to be coming out relatively
I'm looking
soon.
for you. There is so much information in your brain right now. The director's name is Francis Lee.
Francis, thank you. Yes.
Francis Lee also had another movie recently, Ammonite, with Kate Winslet.
Which is a lesbian film.
Right.
That was brilliantly parodied on Saturday Night Live.
Good. Now there's a question I wanted to get to, and where is it? Oh, Tom Hardy playing Handsome Bob in Rock and Rolla mentions Angel.
Oh, I don't remember if I got that one in or not, but he also one of the twins in the Craze, whatever that movie where he plays the Craze. One of them was gay too, but
Oh, right.
again, the later we get, the more the more movies and people were jockeying for space. So apologies if I did not get to everything that everybody wants to see in there.
Yeah, no, it's hard. And then Tom Hardy did a thing which, I think speaks to the time that we're in, where someone asked him if he's ever had any kind of gay experience in a big, glossy magazine cover article. And he's like, well, of course I have.
I'm an
I want to
actor.
know what every kind of experience is like. I'm an actor. That's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that a few decades earlier, somebody who is so hot and on the rise as he was at that point couldn't say that and not have their
Sure.
career be doomed.
Yeah, absolutely. Although Brando, bless his heart, made a very similar comment where somebody asked him about it. He's like, "Yeah, I've slept with men and women, and I'm not ashamed of either."
Yeah. And it makes sense because
And
Tom Hardy is kind of a Brando-ish figure
oh,
in
for
some
sure,
ways.
yeah. And in fact,
Gage.
his next movie is basically The Wild One, so the bike
True.
riders. So
Gage says, is Weekend mentioned? I believe it's one of Alonso's favorites.
it certainly is. I had a longer Andrew Hay essay that I unfortunately had to cut for space, but I absolutely mentioned Weekend. It is a great movie.
Heather says, Legend is the Cray biopic with the
Yes.
dueling Tom Hardys.
Right.
We have a question from the Cutlass magazine. Any Monkey Man review coming along with a discussion of the trans women? I still have not seen Monkey Man. I know, Alonso, you saw it and you did a little out of the theater reaction for me. But there's a trans character in it?
Several, actually.
Oh.
He winds up kind of hiding out in this sort of, it's almost like a monastery or a convent or something. There's this sort of enclave of trans women who are providing shelter with each other and sort of fending off the authorities, and then they wind up having a very heroic role in the big final action sequence.
Interesting. I hear it's really good. I wanted to see it, and I can't recall why I didn't. I think it was spring break, and I was skiing.
Maybe so.
So Ruben Carazana, thank you so much for your contribution. Ruben says, Alonso is my answer whenever someone asks if I've met a celebrity. He says, I introduced myself at the Angelica in Dallas when I was an SMU student. Looking forward to the book. Ruben, when were you at SMU? I went to SMU too. I was there from 89 to 93. I suspect I'm a lot older than you.
Go Mustangs.
Yes, indeed. Pony up, fire up Stangs. John Stone, thank you very, very much, John Stone. What influences do you think made Hollywood more open-minded to gay actors and characters? Were there any defining movies or moments that shined light? That's a good question.
I mean, obviously there are some films that are pivot points, but I think a lot of it is just the change of society. Usually, I think people think about the movies are sort of molding society, but I think it's usually backwards. I think society gets there first, and then once the money people feel comfortable and being like, okay, I guess audiences won't run screaming from this, we can maybe try a little something, But I think in the late 80s, you have, like, in about a 2-week period in New York City, you have Desert Hearts opens and Parting Glances and My Beautiful Laundrette and Doña Erlinda and Her Son. And those, I think, really sort of, I think that kind of primes the pump for the new queer cinema, which is just a few years after that. But even before that, like, in 1982, you get Making Love and Victor Victoria and Personal Best. And I think that's all happening both as a response to the backlash against cruising, like how much, queer audiences were, protesting that movie while it was being made. But I think also as a pushback against the Anita Bryant thing in Florida in the late 70s, where, she's spearheading this campaign to, like, strip away civil rights protections for LGBTQ plus people. And it's so public and so ugly. And it's kind of making people take sides. And she's, sort of in the entertainment industry. She's a former Miss America and a recording star and, Florida orange juice spokesperson. I think that a lot of people in show business were sort of like, we're not that. Let's do something where we're not that, So yeah, I think usually it is historical societal changes kind of running it, and then Hollywood playing catch up. But there are definitely moments along the way where you feel like, oh, this is not something we've seen before.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Children's Hour somewhere in the book too, which was, of course, a play first,
Right.
but it became a movie. That was like what, the 60s?
Well, it was a play, and then it became a movie in the 40s that because
Oh,
of the code, they
I
couldn't
see.
really do it the same way. So they called it These Three, and it became about a love triangle where the rumor in question was that one of these two teachers was sleeping with the guy, or they were both sleeping with the guy. And then when they did it for realsies in the 60s and did the play as written, it is about a rumor about two school teachers being lesbians, and then how that rumor prompts one of the teachers to admit that she actually is and has been sort of
Yeah.
tormented for years over her affections for her friend.
Yeah. But that's even earlier than the 80s. So and Lou asks, are there any older Latinx films you'd recommend? Looking forward to picking up the book. Thank you both for everything you do. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. I mean, that are queer, not that I know of, but I mean, like, I'm a big fan of Lupita Tovar, who is one of the first big Mexican movie stars in talkies. She was in a film called Santa, which was the first Mexican talkie. And she most famously, I think, what she's most remembered for now is that she starred in the Spanish language version of Dracula that they
Mm.
shot at night on the same sets of the Bela Lugosi version. Early in the talkie period, they were worried about losing the international audience because obviously silent films, you just change the intertitles and bam, you're in business, you know. But they really weren't dubbing yet, and they were worried about how they were going to play to foreign markets. So this exec at Universal named Charles Kohner comes up with this idea of, we have the same sets. At night we'll bring in a new cast, a new crew, and we'll do the same movie but in Spanish or German or whatever.
Oh.
And they only wound up doing two or three of them, but they did a Spanish language Dracula, and it's great. And it actually, a lot of people think it's better than the Todd Browning one. And it was considered lost for a long time. And the great historian David Scal, who passed away earlier this year, tragically, who was gay, found the pieces of it and reconstructed the film. And now you can see it. And then, in addition to marrying Charles Kohner, their daughter Susan Kohner became, a big deal actress. And she was an Oscar-nominated actress. She was in Imitation of Life and Freud, and then she married fashion designer John Weitz, and their kids are Paul and Chris Weitz,
There you
the
go.
filmmakers. So Lupita Tovar sort of begat a Hollywood dynasty.
Right, Chuck and Buck.
Yes.
Right, there you go.
It
It all
all
makes
comes
sense.
around.
Yes, that's so interesting. SLC 2466 mentions Dirk Bogarde in Victim way back in
Yes.
role so close to his own sexuality. It's funny that you mentioned this because Victim is the movie we're going to do for our Off the Menu review
Yes.
on our Patreon this month. If you are or if you're not a member of our Patreon, just FYI, once a month we do a thing called Off the Menu where we put a poll out there on a different subject each time. This month's poll is tied to Alonso's book, and so he picked a whole bunch of queer films, and Victim is the one that we're going to review based on the vote. So I've never seen it, so I'm looking forward to it.
I'm very excited for you to see it.
Thank you. Christine asks about Rocky Horror Picture Show, says Tim Curry certainly broadened my horizons.
a very groundbreaking film in a lot of ways. I think that in the 70s, that movie played a very key part in a lot of people my age, certainly, and older, will point to that film as being a real sort of pivotal point for kind of coming to understand themselves. I think for a lot of closeted gay guys, it was sort of their first time to put on gold lame underwear or, put on drag or whatever and kind of play around with that level of sexuality. For a lot of trans people, dressing up was sort of the first time that they kind of allowed themselves to really, have on the outside what they felt on the inside, And so, that movie, for whatever its flaws, I think definitely its level of sort of sexual playfulness and subversion had a real impact on audiences, and I think was kind of a starter kit for a lot of queer people sort of coming to figure out who they were.
For sure, the liberation of it, right? No matter who you are, it feels like a safe place, like in the movie Fame.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Like they go see Rocky Horror, and the uptight singer girl goes and gets crazy on stage.
Yeah.
I want to mention also. Oh, John Kaufman asks, does your book mention George Cukor, one of the most famous gay directors of classic Hollywood? Yes, very early on. Yes,
for sure. Yeah. And a thing about Cukor that's interesting. William Mann talks about this in Behind the Screen, which he got in his interviews with people of that era. He goes, nobody talked about being in or out of the closet, because out of the closet was just not an option for Hollywood in the 30s and 40s. The terms that people would use then were circumspect and overt. So circumspect meant, you were kind of keeping it quiet, and you were,
so much for your kind donations here. David says, hey, Alonso, do you think it's wrong and subjective to say straight actors can't play gay or transgender characters? I think they can, as long as it's positive, because actors can play anything. What say you?
I think those are two separate things. I think that trans actors should be the one playing trans characters, because, and I've seen this defended in much more eloquently than I'm about to do so, but it kind of boils down to the idea of so many people look at a trans person and think that it is a costume or a disguise or an illusion. And so if you have a cis man playing a woman, a trans woman, then it becomes this thing of like, oh, well, trans women are just really cis men, And also, again, I kind of bring it back to that earlier thing of, unless you're going to cast trans people in all kinds of roles and put them in all kinds of movies playing all kinds of characters, if the only roles they can get are trans characters, then let them play all the trans characters, because they need to work and they need to build their career. Because the other argument is always like, oh, well, there aren't any trans movie stars, we got to make our money back. I'm like, well, there are never going to be any trans movie stars if movies don't give them the opportunities that other people get. And I think there are examples of, in Together, Patty Harrison is playing not just a cisgender woman, but a cisgender pregnant woman, brilliantly, and I would like to see that kind of outreach going on and that kind of boldness in casting. So, yes, on one level, of course, acting is acting. You can do whatever and you're capable and yada yada. But I think that in the case of trans characters, there is a real level of semiotic understanding of what are we seeing and how is this being portrayed. And then there's just the straightforward business level of like, these actors are talented and need to work. And if you aren't going to cast trans actors as cis characters, or gay, LGBT, performers as straight characters, then let them taste the rainbow.
And there's a whole documentary which we've reviewed here, which I'm forgetting. Disclosure. Yes, thank you. Which is really insightful and gets its arms around a lot as far as representation of like trans characters.
It's on Netflix. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend it.
It's really good. Yeah. Seth says, do you have a favorite coming out scene that just gets you? For me, it's kissing Jessica Stein. And Seth, thank you for picking up an early copy of Alonso's book and posting about it on Instagram. That was very nice of you.
God, a coming out scene. There are a lot of them. I'll tell you, I love the movie Beautiful Thing. Just all the stuff that's going on in that. And that moment, especially the moment where the two boys go out and they like, they go to their first gay bar and stuff. But then on the way home, they're kind of running through a park and, Cass Elliott's Make Your Own Kind of Music is playing, and they're sort of playing tag in the trees. And then they start kissing, and it's just like, it gets me every time. But God, coming out scenes, I don't know. There's so many racing through my head right now. It's hard for me to pin one down.
Did you ever think of an answer to the earlier question about who's your favorite gay character?
Oh man. Yeah, you know what? Like this book has hundreds of them. I can't pick a child,
Heather asks, and I know you address this in your book, what are Alonso's thoughts on The Crying Game and the pop culture reaction to it?
I think that was such a thing of its moment. I don't think that movie, I'm pretty sure that movie now would be handled differently. The reveal in that film is such a zing, twist moment. But But I think I'm not mad at that movie. I think it treats the character of Dill with some grace, and I think that yes, it is a cisgender character playing a trans woman, but it's a beautiful performance. And what sadly the legacy of that movie, I think, is moments like Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, where they turn it into something really grotesque. But I think so many of these movies that we look at historically, we have to be like, well, it was 1956 or it was 1974, and so the crying game is, well, it was 1992. So yeah, I think it definitely moved the conversation forward, even if part of that conversation was like, let's not maybe do this quite this way again.
Yeah. Jesse points out Almodovar, of course, as a gay man, spending most of his career revolving around themes of gender and identity. Yes, I know he's your favorite filmmaker ever, and you devote some space to him in the book. Andrea points out, I like how Nick from Heartstopper comes out to his mom. It's really sweet.
Oh, that is a good one.
Yeah. And we just learned that the third season of Heartstopper will come out October 3rd, I want to say. Yeah. So we'll definitely be recapping that. Gage asks, Alonso, do you talk about gay-coded villains in the book, specifically within the Disney catalog? And what are your thoughts on the subject? Well, of course, there is Ursula in The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, I didn't really get into that. I probably should have more. I was more looking at gay-coded things like Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca. Like a lot of these Hitchcock characters that, like, they don't come out and say it, but it's like, that Martin Landau has it bad for James Mason in North by Northwest, things like that. Yeah, I did not really delve into that. And damn it. Now you're making me realize I probably should have. Louis Vertel apparently had a really funny line recently because, Jinx Monsoon is the villain in the latest Doctor Who and apparently is killing it. And she's apparently has wanted to do sort of Disney villain characters. And Louis Vertel's like, yeah, Walt Disney figured out 70 years ago that queers were the good, and queers and drag queens were the best villains.
Right. I mean, look, Sleeping Beauty. I mean, like, all the awful witches are like over the top kind of drag queeny figures. Oh, yeah. So.
All the way up to, like, and what Jeremy Irons and The Lion King and stuff,
Yeah. I wonder what is queer about that, do you think? Is it like the flamboyant kind of scenery chewing element of it?
It's sort of the fey kind of, like, I think, like, I'm trying to remember which one George Sanders, is it like, it's not The Jungle Book. Anyway, maybe it's The Jungle Book, but yeah, that's sort of like, continental and a little bit mysterious and not very macho, but devious all the same. That's the vibe you get from a lot of the Disney villains.
Yes, Gage says save it for the sequel. Yes, for sure. On the game points out Javier Bardem in Skyfall.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think I do mention him actually.
Yeah, that's a good one. We should take off in a little bit because Alonso needs to save his voice for his many, many appearances and for saying thank you over and over again tonight, which he's going to do when everyone gives him his very due praise. A couple more questions that we should get to, though. Christine mentions, do you think Bridgerton will have one of the siblings be gay and have a same-sex romance? They've sort of hinted, but it's not fully clear. I mean, one of the second in line brother is gay, right?
Yeah, so the Bohemian one. B, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're afraid of it, and they've certainly been dancing around it. So I think it's just a question of when are they going to circle back to it.
Heather mentioned, as a listener to this podcast, I know that Dave White's favorite gay character is chatty executive assistant in Beyonce and Idris Elba's Obsessed.
In her hotel room? Yes, that is definitely a favorite of his.
Dylan asks, Alonso, do you have an opinion on Sacha Baron Cohen's Bruno character? In my opinion, it's the exact opposite of the common gay panic humor of the 2000s, and the whole bit relies on audience reaction to gayness.
God, I haven't thought about Bruno in so long, and I remember being kind of mixed about the movie, and I think it's one of those characters where, I mean, as with so much of what Sacha Baron Cohen does, it's not so much what he's doing, but what reaction is he eliciting from other people. And I think the in-your-faceness of Bruno, it's not, haha, look at this weird gay guy. It's, look at these rednecks freaking out about this, very, larger than life gay guy. But it's been so long since I've looked at any of it, I don't really remember.
Which is also the point of Borat, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
Borat saying, look at these ridiculous people who are freaking out over
what can I get
Borat.
you to say in response to like either one-upping my own sort of like weird xenophobia or just your response to me as this odd character, you know?
Joe Go says, we don't talk about Bruno. Very good.
Boom.
No. Speaking of Disney, Looney wants to know, will any of the Alonso's Palm Springs interviews be recorded or live streamed?
I hadn't planned on it, but I mean, you know, I don't know if somebody decides they're going to hold their phone up and do it, I guess. But I'm looking forward to it. I have been reading David Ansen for much of my life, and he's a critic I've always admired. So I'm really delighted that he agreed to come do this conversation with me tonight.
And a very sweet guy.
He is.
David Ansen. Sway wants to know, what is our favorite Joel Schumacher movie?
Cousins.
Tigerland. Right?
Yeah.
No nipples in the bat suit in Tigerland. That's serious indie territory. David LeMan, thank you once more. You're way too generous. Says, I think in the case of someone playing trans, it makes more sense to see someone who is cisgender play trans because you see emotional transformation. Trans actors should play cisgender people like MJ Rodriguez on Loot.
Well, I'll tell you, I have seen trans characters play a transitioning character where they will play, you know, if it's a trans woman, they'll start the movie maybe, you know, male presenting, and then you'll see a transition over the course of the film, and they're capable of doing that. Again, it's they're actors, they're performers, you know.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, these are all great questions. We are so thankful to all of you for spending some time with us on Tuesday on a busy day for Alonso, schlepping out to Palm Springs and taking time to see us. So thank you, Alonso, on this very, very busy day for taking questions.
Thanks everybody who came out today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sending you all good wishes today. And again, if you want to pick up Alonso's book, you can always ask at your local bookstore. There's a link to where you can get it directly to order online, also below. And
library.
Yes, ask your library. Everyone says congrats to you. Christine says congrats. Teddy says Amazon just dropped off my coffee. Perfect timing.
Sweet.
Very good. Todd says good luck to you tonight. And Jesse says congrats and thanks. We'll be back on Friday with reviews of Back to Black and Babes.
Yes.
Which is a comedy with Alana Glazer and Michelle Buteau. And we'll do Movie News Live. Oh, also before that, we're seeing Furiosa tomorrow.
You're bearing the lead.
I'm sorry, we're seeing Furiosa tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm getting a ride from Glenn Whip because I can't drive. So I'm going to get a ride from my
Hoist that leg out the window and you'll be fine.
I know. Well, a couple things. I make us a carpool so I can put us in the carpool lane of the 405. And I have a temporary disabled placard so I'll get us better parking at Century City Mall.
Sweet.
I'm helpful. So
you got it lined up.
I do. So we're seeing Furiosa tomorrow. We're going to have a quick out of the theater reaction for you on Wednesday evening after we're done watching it. And then I'll have an early review of Furiosa for you on Thursday. So keep an eye out for us for that.
Yes. Thank you all for being here. Y'all are great. And if everybody bought the book, thank you. I super appreciate it. I hope you like it.
We'll see you guys in a couple days. Thanks so much. Bye.